Reactions are pouring in over a new Florida law that bans instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity in kindergarten through third grade classrooms.
Yeah, President Biden has denounced the measure as hateful. The Walt Disney Company has vowed to help repeal the law. Now, some teachers are worried about the impact the legislation could have on their students. In fact, one educator called it a, quote, blatant attack on education. David, welcome. As you know, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed this bill into law on Monday. It'll take effect in July. But first, explain what the law does and the repercussions some people might face if they break it.
What the law does, in effect, is make schools less safe for marginalized, minoritized students who already are saying that they don't find schools and too often they don't find communities to be safe. Students who identify as members of the LGBTQIA plus community, and students who otherwise want to empathize and show compassion for members of the LGBTQIA plus community. The bill also impacts teachers, educators, again, who might be members of the community or who not, but who will be further constrained with regard to the ways that they can support or even talk to their students about our reality. It is our reality that as long as there have been people, there have been queer people. What the bill also does is restate rights that parents already have based on the 14th Amendment. And so what it's designed to do is to use fear to encourage people to show up to vote during this midterm season. And it's also designed to target our children who didn't ask to be born and who deserve to be safe and protected, especially in the spaces we force them to move through by law, including schools.
David, you talk about our reality, and I have sort of a practical question. And, if a child were to ask their teacher, why does Johnny have two dads, or why does Sally have two moms? Which is a very, realistic scenario these days. How is the teacher supposed to respond to a question like that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I taught kindergarten and third grade in New York and know that for a lot of elementary school educators, helping young people make connections to the world around them is our primary responsibility. And what this bill would do is mean that I, as an educator, would be forced to silence this student or to shame them into not asking the question and contribute to the bigotry that exists in a world where we don't acknowledge people who don't show up in ways that are traditional or what we call normal. Our reality is that people live in different ways. There are children who have one parent. There are children who have four parents. There are children who have primary relationships with their grandparents. And it's important for educators to show up in ways that are not only competent but compassionate to help young people make sense of the world that they've been invited into.
David, what message do you think the governor is sending by signing this legislation?
The governor is joined a number of other political bullies in sending a few messages. One is that they're putting politics over people and that it is more important for them to turn out voters who are supportive of white supremacy, who don't want to have conversations about history or our reality to the previous point. And he's saying that he cares about them over children who didn't ask to be born. To my second point, there's a lot of gaslighting to suggest that kids don't show up with queer identities or questions about queer realities. And in a world where we know, based on data, that children who are members of racial as well as sexual minority groups are experiencing suicidal ideation at increased rates. They're facing increased mental health challenges. They're being pulled and pushed out of schools into sex trafficking, into the school-to-prison pipeline. What he's saying is that he doesn't care about some of our children, that some of us are disposable. And I want to be clear, we're talking about Governor DeSantis in Florida, who is also auditioning to run for president. But there are more than 42 states in this country have introduced these kinds of bills that target censorship around history and or that try and prevent conversations about queer identities, contributions, or histories.
All right, really, really quickly, David, can you tell us if you think that this law could survive legal challenges, and if it makes it all the way up to the Supreme Court, would it be upheld?
Based on the current composition of the Supreme Court, absolutely that's possible, and we are actively working to ensure that there are roadblocks put up at every step of trying to advance this legislation. It is most important for us to understand that parents already have the rights that the bill purports to provide them. Our children are often inculcated in the privileged ways that we think about expectations around sex and gender, sometimes before they're born. Think about gender reveals in the way that we assume that girls are going to like pink and boys like blue. And so it's really important for us to do work to support all of our children while we also try and forestall the codification of this bill in ways that will impact schools more.
David Johns, thank you so much. We appreciate your perspective.
Thank you for having me.